Good morning to those of you who've just joined us in the last minute or two. So good morning to Becky and Claire and Greg and Hannah, Imogen, Leanne, Louise, Lyndon, Rachel, Richard, Stephanie. Any of you who are currently tuned in, if you could just let us know that the sound is sounding good at your end, that would be fantastic to get a little bit of feedback. So if you could just drop me a note. Thank you, Greg. Leanne, thank you very much. We're sounding awesome. Thank you, Leanne. You can come again. Richard Smith, thanks. Fabulous. Stephanie, all good. Rachel, you can hear us loud and clear. Hopefully not too loud. Let us know if we sound like we're shouting so early on a Thursday morning. Thank you very much for feeding back. We're going to get going in a couple of minutes, and we look forward to getting underway. So we'll just wait for a few others to join us. And hopefully Steve is doing his warm-up. Steve, have you got a little bit of a warm-up act? Are you guessing gargling at that end?
The quick round fox jumps over the lazy dog. That's about it.
Okay.
That's as much of a warm-up as I do, guys. I can only apologise.
Good morning, Tram. Good morning, Stephanie. Again, just saying to our current attendees, if any of you would like to drop us a note and let us know that you can hear us loud and clear. Steve is also on the line. We're going to get going in a couple of minutes, but just checking sound and checking that we're going to be coming across live and clear. So please do give us a little bit of feedback. Steve, could you just say a few pearls just to check your sound levels?
Yeah, morning everybody. I promise there are jokes, I don't promise they'll be good. If you've ever heard me speak before, then you'll know that that's probably true. But we're hoping to, there's quite a lot of ground for us to cover, and hopefully it's going to be something that's not too easy for you to fall asleep during.
Thanks, Steve. So we've had a feedback. Apparently, Steve, you're sounding a little bit echoey.
Is that any better, everyone? I might be holding it too close, too far away. Is that okay?
Guys, let us know if Steve sounds less echoey. I don't know if he is in a cupboard under the stairs somewhere, but he sounded good this end. So
I do let me out of the filing cupboard every now and again. So to the best of my knowledge, it should be okay.
Okay, there is a little bit of feedback, so we'll see how that goes, and if that gets a little bit more echoey, then guys, just keep in touch with us and let us know.
Is that any better, anyone?
That's better. That is better.
That's better.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, I know where I need to be holding the mic now. That's good.
Richard Proctor, thank you. Oh, Rich. Okay, it's better. Good. Steve not sounding great. I think that's about the echo rather than you, Steve. Greg saying still a little echoey, a bit better, still very echoey.
So how's that, guys? Is that better?
Can you say a few more words, Steve, maybe, just to...
Yeah, just bear with us, guys. We're just running through a few bugs in the system so that we're then ready to go. But I'm hoping that should be a bit better for you.
Guys, how's that? There's feedback on your mic. Okay. I can certainly hear. I understand where people are saying it's a little echoey and there's a little bit of feedback on your mic, Steve. But I think that was a lot better. So I think we'll certainly be able to hear you. So that's good.
Excellent. I might sound like Brian Blessed, but you will be able to hear me.
Thanks, Hannah. Bit of interference. Still getting a lot of feedback from Leanne and squeaky feedback.
How about if I come off my mic and I'll dial in?
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Steve. Thanks for your feedback,
Two
guys.
seconds.
It's really helpful. We want to get it right for you.
One moment.
Okay, thanks for all the new joiners. You're very welcome today. Just to let you know, we are going to get underway in a minute or two. We're just getting Steve sorted in terms of his sound, and then we'll get underway very shortly. So thanks for joining us, and we'll get underway in a minute or two. We'll just get Steve back on the line and make sure that he's loud and clear for you all so that you can fully enjoy his presentation. I must admit, I've had a preview of his slides, and we're certainly in for an interesting ride. So stay with us, and we'll have Steve underway shortly.
Right. Is that any better, everyone?
That's a lot better my end, Steve. Guys, how's Steve sounding to you now? Oh, there's yes. Much better. You're great.
Excellent.
You're sounding perfect. Okay, I think that means that we're good to go. So I'd just like to formally say good morning all. Formally introduce myself. I'm Michelle Leavesley. I'm the Marketing Director of CrowdControlHQ even, and I would like to welcome you all to this very special webinar on the laws in social media. Now, no doubt, like many of you on the line today, I have felt an element of learning as I go in trying to keep on top of the dynamic world of social media. It seems like no matter which sector you work in, and I know we've got lots of different sectors represented today, public sector, commercial and charitable, it is a constant battle to keep on top of the legal issues. Now, today we have a very special guest speaker, Steve Kuncewicz, and I'm going to read out his Twitter biog. So his Twitter bio says he's lawyer, IP, media and social media, an author, an aspiring supervillain, and forever Manchester. So I am hoping he tells us a little bit later about the supervillain. So in a second, I'm going to hand over to Steve. But as he has so much ground to cover and so many of you are on the line today, we have decided to take questions at the end. However, as I'm chairing the session today, could I make a plea that you do send me your questions as you go? Otherwise, I'll find it a little overwhelming at the end of the webinar if all of the questions come in one go. So if Steve sparks a question and you think that's something I'd like to ask, please send that question in so that I can start to prepare the questions for Steve. Now, Steve has said that he's very happy to take general questions that are relevant to the whole group. But obviously, just to emphasize that if it's something very specific, a specific legal question relating to your company or your business, Steve will naturally take that conversation with you offline, and we will pass all of those on to Steve. So without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to hand over to Steve.
Right, good morning, guys. Just to follow on what Michelle was saying earlier, yeah, I'm a geek for this kind of thing, as it has become very obvious through the course of this. So if it's a question I can answer in 2 minutes, I'll answer it in 2 minutes without a clock running, because I do it anyway, to be honest. But as Michelle's hinted, we've got a lot to cover. We've got an awful lot to get through. This is fairly high level. It'd be very easy to spend a day on going through this if we were going to do this as lawyers would normally expect you to. So as I say, if you do have questions after the fact, then do please follow up. Michelle, I'm clicking the click icons just disappeared on. Oh no, right, okay, it's there again. Right, so we'll do the dull bit first. That's me. That's a photograph of me. I don't take a good one, as you can see. I'm head of IP media at a firm called Berman's in Manchester. I specialise in social media. To give you a bit of background, a few years ago at the first very appropriately named Golden Twitter Awards in 2009, I was part of the team that was commended for Best Business-to-Business Use of Twitter. Assumedly nobody turned up in 2011, so I was named Best Corporate Individual. I won a Perspex Brick in 2014 from Downtown Manchester in Business. Took that home to my wife, who asked me what Best Legal Entrepreneur means. She has a point. I am occasionally wheeled out by the BBC or ITV or a number of news outlets when somebody does something particularly stupid on social media, which thankfully for my sake is fairly often. And before me and my wife had a 4-year-old, and before, well, when I still had available free time, I wrote a couple of books on social media. which I'm just trying to click through on the slides to let you see. There they are. They're out of date. Ask me nicely, I'll send you a PDF. They bought me a Mac, which is why I wrote them. So moving on from that, I think it's important to emphasise, oh God, that's a terrible picture of me at the first Golden Twitter Awards. I was 7.5 stone heavier. If anybody has an into Slim Fast, then I will be sponsored by them. But this is a big list of stuff that has come my way, of opportunities that have come my way through social media. Allegedly, I'm Manchester's most followed lawyer on Twitter. Lawyers are rubbish at Twitter, so that shouldn't impress you very much. I do a lot through LinkedIn. I blog for The Drum. I have an IP and media law blog of my own when I get the time to write one. I sit on a number of boards. Hilariously, I'm a member of Rochdale Development Agency. If any of you live in the M62 corridor, I have nothing to do with its current state. If you go looking for me on Twitter, you'll see that I'm a bit of a geek, which explains the supervillain point that Michelle was making, and also explains why I have a GIF of Optimus Prime as my profile picture. But the point is that all of these opportunities have come my way, one way or another, through social media. So it's a huge part of my daily life, for better or worse. I met my wife through social media, funnily enough. The only person that doesn't know that is my mother-in-law. It's a huge part of my practice in terms of the work I do and how I develop business. And this hopefully isn't come from the point of view of, you mustn't do this and all doom and gloom. The opportunity for you guys is huge, but you just need to be aware of the risks. And there are risks. So if this were in a room, I'd be asking you to put your hands up if you knew the difference between Web 1 and Web 2. Assuming that none of you are putting your hands up right now because you've got better things to do, Web 1 was the top half of this diagram, which for a long time was built on the back of a military communication system called ARPANET, originally put together in the 1970s, so that Cold War nuclear missile silos could talk to each other, until Tim Berners-Lee came along in the mid-80s and came up with the idea of the World Wide Web, which was the first iteration of the civilian internet, so computers could talk to each other. And for a long time, all we had, the extent of our interaction with the web, was the top half of this diagram. Webmasters paid a huge amount of money, would build sites for big corporates, people would read them, that's about it. Of course, now we're in the second half of the diagram, the lower half, which is Web 2, Web 4, Web 5, the semantic web, the social web, however you want to describe it this week, probably the social web's a better word, whereby it's not just webmasters who can disseminate information now. Anybody can do. Anybody can set a blog up, anybody can build a site through Wix if they know what they're doing, and can disseminate their thoughts and their information, and more importantly, have that commented on and comment on other people's information out to the world. Now that's a huge opportunity in that it democratizes everybody's chance to get their voice heard on social media. But of course, it's a huge risk as well, in that people are doing this without journalism degrees, without media law training, and you can put content out into the ecosystem. It will be shared and used and commented on in ways that you never anticipated, so you do lose a bit of control over it. Now, Orson Welles, one of those great film directors, once said that a great film is never finished, it's only ever abandoned. He's right on social media. That's meant to make you sound clever. I got that from the Star Wars DVD. But it's true in that you will put content out into the web. It will be shared. It will be commented on in ways that you never saw coming. And unfortunately, as we'll get to see, the wisdom of the crowd doesn't always win out. So you can start out with a really good intention, but unfortunately, it doesn't always end up that way. Now, I am used to giving this talk to a very skeptical room that says, well, it's social media, it's geeky, it's for kids, we don't need to worry about it. Hopefully, all of you disagree with that. It's wrong. We're in a different way of communicating with each other now. Social has changed, whether anyone likes it or not, the way in which we communicate with each other and the way in which we consume media. And just to put that into context, I want to give you a few figures. So because lawyers like figures. One of the few real experts on social media is a guy called Eric Qualman, who runs a website called Socialnomics. If you ever need to sell social media to your various stakeholders, then Socialnomics is a great website to read because every year they put out a video called Social Media Revolution. Unfortunately, the 2016 version wasn't available at the time we started this, but it's a great source of facts and figures about, if you like, the state of the nation of social media. What Eric says, and I agree with him, I think a lot of people do, is that we don't have a choice anymore on whether or not we do social media, and I'd only ever do it with a plan. The choice is how well you do it. Thinking about world populations in terms of who uses which platform, by far the biggest is Facebook, which, if it was a country, would be the biggest country in the world. Put that into perspective, China would be number 2, the USA would be number 8. Depressingly, 50% of the world's population is under 30, and 53% of millennials would rather lose their sense of smell than their technology or their access to it. That's particularly true in my part of the world, and so is the next. More people own a mobile device than a toothbrush. So mobile and social media are now merging technologies, and they're no longer emerging technologies, and that's an important thing to bear in mind. By 2018, video is going to account for about 2/3 of mobile phone usage, and every second, 2 new members join LinkedIn, whose age limit has now been lowered to 13 years old. Terrifyingly, grandparents are the fastest growing demographic on Twitter, and I think on Facebook as well. What this becomes is an exercise in appreciating what's been said about you, what you're saying about your competitors, what's been said about them. And it's a great, rich source of data for sentiment analysis and market intelligence. Bear in mind, the average person has now an attention span of about 7 seconds, less than goldfish, which is 8. And we saw around the death of David Bowie in particular, real-time marketing and newsjacking is more and more common. It can go very well, it can go very badly. Crocs using an ugly white plastic shoe with a Bowie lightning bolt down the side of it to celebrate his birthday, you could argue maybe wasn't in the best of taste, but people are looking for trends to grab onto. So it's not just a geeky thing in the corner anymore. Thinking about the UK, we have a population of 64.1 million, 89% of them are active internet users, 38 million active social media accounts. And that's quite a scary figure. Well, it's quite an interesting figure at the very least. Of our population, we have a population of 64 million. We have 74.8 million mobile phone connections. Now, I was always told that when I first started out in criminal law that the only person who had 2 mobile phones was a drug dealer. Evidently that's not right anymore. In terms of how we use the internet per user, we tend to use it 4 hours a day, and we use it now 2 hours via mobile. Average daily TV viewing, to put that into context, is 3 hours. We've got 89% of the information, like I said before, on an active social media user, active mobile internet users, 58% of the population and growing. And we look at web pages a different way now. Most of the time on laptops and desktops, but increasingly just over 40% via mobile and via a tablet. So the way in which we consume, and more importantly, the way in which we can broadcast our opinion is changing. Previously, you'd have to sit at a desktop to send a tweet after you composed it and thought about what you were going to say. Now you can do it while you're walking down the street. You will see people with their heads down bumping into each other. But that's how fast opinion can spread and how fast you might need to think about managing it. So as far as we go in the UK, our biggest platform is still Facebook, followed swiftly, well, not too swiftly, by Twitter, WhatsApp, Google+, Snapchat, which I still can't quite figure out. But thinking about how we use our mobile phone, there's a big list here. 30% of the time we use social media apps, 24% of the time we watch videos, normally of cats falling off pianos. We play games, 17%, normally Candy Crush or Game of War. We use location-based search. We mobile bank through our phones. Where on that list do you see much reference to actually making calls? And that's an important point, that we now carry around in our pockets a device that is equivalent in power to what was the first supercomputer. And it's a way of communicating with the world. And as Spider-Man will tell you, with great power comes great responsibility. Or more importantly, with great responsibility comes great risk, or with great opportunity comes great risk. Lawyers, we work in the business of minimizing risk wherever possible. It's kind of beaten out of us as we come out of the womb. But as he said, the opportunity is absolutely massive. The opportunity is that you will all, both personally probably and in your businesses, be doing social media already. You'll have existing profiles. What it gives you is a chance to move away from just a broadcasting, communications or public relations role to more active management of your brand. It's a great way to give people an insight into what you do, how you do it, and your processes, what you stand for, your values. It's a great real-time connection with your stakeholders. There was a move to try and have everybody in the United Kingdom having access to 2 megabit broadband. Everyone of working age was meant to have access to 2 megabit broadband by 2015. That unfortunately was derailed. That was something called Universal Service Commitment. But the government is building infrastructure. The government sees the internet in particular and social media as a huge part of their infrastructure plans. So much as not everybody might have access to your online profiles now, or not all of your stakeholders may be online, the chances are they will be in the very near future. So it's a great way to build reputation. It's a great way to build revenue if you do it right. But there are risks. Now, we talked before about a guy called Eric Coleman, a great expert in the field of social media. Another guy that is very, very much worth you paying attention to is a guy called Brian Solis, who came up with the idea of something called the conversation that's happening without you. What Brian says is that even if you don't take part in the conversation, you owe it to yourself to be listening to it, because if you don't, then not only do you not know what people are saying about you, but you also lose the opportunity to be the resource to a community. Now, many people will say, I don't know what to tweet about. You know, often you don't need to sit there and compose war and peace every time you tweet. You can retweet relevant stuff. You can feed things out to your audience that you think they might like to know. And that really, I think, is where the value of the Twitter feed starts to build. But if I'm a business, who do you trust to tweet? You will encounter negativity, you will encounter skepticism. I have encountered 13 death threats from One Direction fans. I'm proud of every one of them. You will encounter, that's the wisdom of the crowd we were talking about before, you will encounter regulatory sanctions now, increasingly the ASA is looking at your social media content, and that's a fertile ground for adjudications. You'll need to get management's buy-in. That can't always be the easiest thing. It's a brand new training need, so training your staff, training your advocates on how to deal with social media properly. And really key to all this is the fact that you need a consistent message and a consistent feel and a consistent experience when people interact with you, your brands and your businesses, because they will expect from you the same service they get online as they get offline. John Lewis is a great example of this. They've had lots of problems with their e-commerce platform. People that will then complain very loudly on Twitter. That happened an awful lot over Christmas, so that's just a window into the fact that people expect the same kind of hand-holding and warm, fuzzy feelings they get dealing with John Lewis when they're offline, when they are online. If you work in an agency, if you work in a business, the easiest and most agile, well, let me just rephrase that. People within a business tend to be able to build a reputation more quickly and in a more agile fashion and without constraints than the business itself, because you've got to worry about brand, you've got to worry about reputation management. That can be a great thing. However, it can also cause tension. If you're in a marketing agency, for example, you may find yourself outshining other members of the agency. You know, your own brand might get more traction, your personal brand might get more traction than the business itself, and that can be quite a difficult thing to get your head around. More importantly, and again, what keeps me in work, online conduct can get you in serious trouble offline. And cheerfully, there are legal risks to bear in mind. Now, there are legal risks with any kind of audience engagement, with any kind of advertising, promotion, anything you do. There's a legal risk of getting out of bed in the morning. This is not designed to paralyze you. However, it's designed to give you an appreciation of that risk. So you're walking out into the world with a bit of a better understanding of the fact that tweeting in haste can lead to you repenting at leisure. So what we need to think about, or what I think you need to be thinking about, certainly is data protection. Now, again, if this were a room full of people, I'd be asking you to put your hand up and tell me if you'd had a positive experience of dealing with data protection. Data protection is very much the new health and safety, or that's the way an awful lot of people see it, but that's actually not that fair. Data protection law applies to any kind of use of personal data. Personal data is defined very widely by the Data Protection Act, and it's anything that can identify you as an individual. So if you think about that, that is your social media ID, and if you are looking at someone's social media profile, certainly if you're vetting them for recruitment purposes, you will be processing personal data. What personal data is all about is two things really. Consent, in that when you get someone's personal data, they have to consent to you using it in a certain way. Fair processing, that so you will have to tell people that you're going to use certain data, you're going to use it in line with the Data Protection Act, so you're going to collect it for certain purposes, you're going to keep it secure, you're only going to hold it for as long as possible, you will make sure that it's kept accurate and up to date. More importantly, if somebody says to you, stop using my data, particularly for marketing purposes, that's a right that data subjects have. You've got to stop using that data. So having thought about all that, you may think, well, how can I ever proactively tweet anyone? The Information Commissioner's Office says that actually tweeting with someone normally isn't going to be too much of an issue around personal data, but it's safer if they're following you. Now that's interacting through Twitter. The reason that this is important is that the Data Protection Act is administered by the Information Commissioner's Office. Up until now, the Information Commissioner has only been able to find businesses who breached the Data Protection Act, who processed personal data in a way that wasn't in what's called the reasonable expectations of the data subject, or say disclose it, have a data breach. You can normally only get a monetary penalty notice of £500,000. Now you would think that that's enough of a stick to beat people with, that they'd take data protection seriously, but it's still a little bit of the shiny thing in the corner that people think they haven't got time to deal with. However, due to changes currently taking place at data protection law at the EU level, soon businesses that have serious data incidents will be able to be fined 4% of their turnover. and you will be expected as businesses to put privacy by design at the heart of everything that you do. You'll probably have to appoint a dedicated data protection officer. You'll have to look at consents being more up to date, being clearer, because when someone gives consent to you using their data in a particular way, it needs to be clear, informed. It can't be, well, we think we gave consent. Implied consent's not on the agenda these days. It's not something that's frowned upon by the Information Commissioner. And the other side of all of this, of course, is that we process data when we're direct marketing. So the Information Commissioner Office is very hot on this at the moment. There are regulations that sit alongside the Data Protection Act called the Privacy Regulations, which say that you have to do certain things when you send out, for example, email communications. You have to say who you are, you can't disguise your identity, you have to give people an easy means of opting out of receiving further communication from you, and that's a right under the Data Protection Act as well. People can say stop using my data for marketing purposes, as I said earlier on. When people say stop, do not pass go, put them on a blacklist, do not collect £200. And more importantly, it's important to mention that in email marketing, you also need to screen against industry databases. The Information Commissioner is not shy in fining people for cold calling, for spam texting. They do it fairly regularly, and those fines, as I said, will go up. Up until now, to be able to sue or for the Information Commissioner to take action, there normally needs to be some kind of substantial distress as a result of having received spam. That's now changed. So data protection is going to be very much at the top of most businesses' compliance agenda going forward. You can do sentiment analysis. Again, if you're in a platform, you can tweet at people, you can like, share, repost, whatever else, because that's normally covered by the platform's terms of use. But data protection should be something that you're thinking about. That not only because of the change at the EU level, but we've had a case that says previously you were only able to sue for a breach of the Data Protection Act as an individual if there had been some kind of financial loss. That's changed now, and a claim can be based just on distress. Now, cases suggest that the amount of damages you'd recover wouldn't be that expensive. However, cases are starting to make their way through the courts now, and we're going to see a raft of these cases going forward. More importantly, if someone complains about anything that's held on any of your sites, any of your social media feeds, on the basis that it's a data protection issue, take down first, ask questions later, have very clear policies for dealing with those complaints, and ensure that you do so very transparently. Like I said, guys, we're going through a lot. Hopefully I'm not going too fast. Is that about okay? Michelle, we're getting anybody saying that we're going too fast, or is that about all right?
No. We haven't had anyone yet saying that you've gone too fast. I think everyone's listening with intent. So no, it's all good, Steve.
God knows what intent, but yes, with intent. So moving on from there, thinking about people that you just have to deal with, the Advertising Standards Authority. For those of you who are familiar with it, it's a self-regulatory body set up to regulate marketing communications and kind of police the industry itself, so the government doesn't have to. You may or may not know that for the past 5 years now, the Information Commissioner's Office, the Advertising Standards Authority, has the ability to regulate what you say on social media, has the ability to act on complaints over what is said on your own website, even in emails, in email marketing campaigns, and in text messages as well. Basically, it covers all media now. What the ASA expects from you is that your marketing communication should be legal, decent, honest, truthful, and not be misleading as to the nature of the offer that you're making. So thinking about user-generated content and social media, you will come across testimonials. You can't fabricate them. You need to ensure that they're real, that you have an audit trail going back to them so that you can be sure that they are actually real if anybody asks you a question. The ASA can't fine you, the ASA can't send you to prison. However, what they can do is adjudicate against you. And if you look every Wednesday morning, you'll see in the popular press a lot of stories about claims over broadband speed, about when Argos should have delivered within a time window, normally complaints made to the Advertising Standards Authority. So it forms part of your brand legacy. If people go searching for you, then they'll find an ASA adjudication. That's not going to be good for you. More importantly, in the online space, what the ASA can do is actually take out adverts to say that you are a repeated breach. You're a repeated breach of what's called the CAP code, which is the advertising code which the ASA administers. There's a Committee of Advertising Practice, and they can also remove your paid search results as well. So if you get it wrong, then the ASA is forced to adjudicate against you. Yes, they can't fine you. Yes, they can't send you to prison. If you're a persistent offender, they can refer you to the Competition and Markets Authority, who may try and get an injunction against you. But it's a real stick to be beaten with, and it's not something you want to be falling foul of. Behind it is some legal backstop, however. And what the government is more worried about than anything else at the moment is when people are being advertised to, more often than not via social media, and they don't realise they're being advertised to. So the first time the ASA was asked to deal with a Twitter campaign involved Katie Price, shy retiring young flower that she is, was part of a Twitter stunt campaign that was run by Snickers. As you can see from the photo, Katie and a number of other brand ambassadors were asked to tweet about something they wouldn't normally talk about. So in Katie's case, it was Eurozone economic policy. She spent all day talking about it. And at the end of the day, both she, Rio Ferdinand, and a number of other people took part in a reveal tweet, which was the one that you see on screen. Hashtag you're not you when you're hungry, hashtag Snickers, hashtag SPON, S-P-O-N. There was also a link back to Snickers' website. Somebody complained about that and said, I'm not sure that it's clear that that's advertising. Therefore, you should adjudicate against them. The ASA looked at it and said, well, actually, if you look at the final reveal tweet of that particular campaign, which was them pointing to the Snickers and then saying hashtag SPON, S-P-O-N, that's a holdover from a US approach of saying SPON as in sponsored tweet. And that made it clear to the wider world that this was all part of the marketing campaign, so Snickers escaped censure. Having said that, Wayne Rooney did get in trouble a couple of years later, around the same time actually, when he took part in a Twitter campaign. He tweeted out, my resolution, start the year as champion, finish the year as champion, hashtag go Nike, and a link to Nike's website. Somebody complained about that and said that it wasn't clear that that's part of the marketing campaign either. So somebody complained to the ASA, and that was actually adjudicated in favour of the complainant. That was found to be in breach of the CAP code because Nike said that, well, people know that they're brand ambassadors, people know they're paid huge amounts of money, it's obvious to people that this is part of a campaign. The ASA said, no, actually it isn't. Not everybody knows that Wayne Rooney, and it was actually Jack Wilshere, are paid brand ambassadors by Nike and may have been misled into thinking that actually this is them acting in their own right as an individual rather than being paid to do so. And that actually is, strictly speaking, a criminal offence under Consumer Protection from Unfair Trading Regulations. It's a blacklisted activity to pass yourself off as a consumer when you're not actually acting as one. So if you do work with brand ambassadors, it's worth thinking about having a contract in place with them and having clauses in there to say that the brand ambassador won't get you in trouble with the ASA, they won't do anything that'll bring you into disrepute, but monitor them very, very carefully because the government is worried about this kind of thing. And one of the big reasons they're worried about this kind of thing is native content. We've seen an explosion in native content failure recently, and the ASA is also worried about that as well. So you can see on here a picture of a lady, I think that might be Zoella. If anybody in the audience can tell me, I don't get the whole YouTuber as rockstar thing just yet. On the bottom left-hand side, you will see a picture of two guys licking Oreo biscuits. And the reason for that is that Oreo, who are owned by Mondelez, asked a number of YouTubers to take part in a campaign whereby they were sent a big box of Oreos, some money, and a list of brand guidelines, and told to go out and do some stunt PR. So they did. Now, a journalist complained about that and said, actually, I'm not sure that the public would know that that's advertising. And it's against the backdrop of quite a lot of complaints recently about the fact that, well, quite a lot of complaints leading to online advertising being the most complained about advertising medium in the United Kingdom. I think it was up, complaints on the online space were up about, I think about 30% last year. So the government is looking into it, and the government does want it to be really clear when something is an advertisement. You have to be. When the government looked at, when the ASA looked at this, Oreo said, Mondelez said, well, we gave them brand guidelines, we acknowledged the partnership, we told them to say thanks to Oreo for making this possible. When you clicked in the bottom half of the window, there were links out to the Oreo website. Surely everybody knew that this was Oreo. This was all part of a planned campaign. The ASA said, no, it wasn't. Even though you have disclaimers in the content, what you need to do is actually tell consumers before they engage with your content that this is part of a campaign. So saying thanks to Oreo for making this possible is not enough. You need to say it up front. And that can be, that might ruin the aesthetics of what you're trying to do, but this is what the ASA will expect of you. Not long after that, we had an adjudication, again brought by, actually after a complaint by a beauty blogger against a site called Beauty Recommended, which is run by Procter & Gamble, over a video as innocuous as something called, what was it called? Easy Winter Lip Makeup Tutorial. Somebody complained about that because they said it's not obvious that this is part of a marketing campaign. Max Factor, Procter & Gamble said, yes, it is. People know that Beauty Recommended is a brand of ours. People know that this is all. They're brand in its own right. People can tell that it's part of a campaign. No. The fact that YouTube is a site where you would normally get editorial content, just people spouting about whatever they want to spout about, again, normally cats falling off pianos, the backdrop of the particular profile page didn't suggest that it was professionally put together, so the public could potentially be misled. What you need to look out for in these kind of situations is certainly context. If something looks and feels professional, like a marketing campaign, then the chances are that the public aren't going to be misled. But you really need to make it very clear when you're dealing with native and online content that this is part of a wider campaign, because otherwise, if you don't tell people at the start of the content before they engage with it that this is a marketing campaign, then you may end up with adjudication against you, and the ASA may say to you, don't run this again. Now, what that will mean is that, to be honest with you, it's a bit like bolting the barn door after the horses have run away, but it's bad publicity, and again, it could potentially have an impact on you contractually as well. Certainly if you're an agency and you're doing work for your clients and you bring them into disrepute, that's a really easy way to lose out on fees. So having talked a bit about
Dave, just to confirm, Hannah and Keith have confirmed it definitely is Zoella, just so that you know.
Oh, it is Zoella. Thanks. Well, you see, guys, this is mutual learning. This is great. That is Zoella. She's very happy about her Ted Baker bag. Thank you. So, anyway, moving on from there. You may run competitions via social media. Lots and lots of people do. If you do not forget that the law will apply to you as well. And there are lots of laws around competition, certainly around the Gambling Act 2005, whereby if you are running a prize competition and it involves the exercise of skill, judgment, or general knowledge, and not everybody who enters goes into the final draw for the winner, then the chances are you're going to be okay with that. But bear in mind also that the ASA is going to be looking at what you do as well. The ASA's Committee of Advertising Practice Code has a big section on how you should run competitions, and there have been a number of adjudications already where people have complained that competitions by tweet, for example, haven't been administered properly, and then you've ended up with an ASA adjudication against them, and again, bad publicity. To give you some examples of that, what the ASA expects of you and what the law would generally expect of you is that you need to be able to publicise the names of the winner, you need to be able to communicate with the winners of prizes when you run these competitions, you need to be fairly transparent about it. There was an adjudication against, I think it was Superdrug a few years ago, who offered, I think it was 11 tickets to go and see a particular musical and a tour of the Hollyoaks set. Because of the fact that they didn't actually follow up properly with the winners and only awarded 10 of the 11 winners prizes, that led to a complaint to the ASA and adjudication that was upheld, and that was a competition that was run through Twitter. Fairly recently, we had a Walker's Crisp competition, again administered through Twitter, where Walker's only sent one tweet to the winners whose names they used to say that they'd won a prize. They didn't contact them properly, therefore the competition wasn't run properly, therefore ASA adjudication. Not long ago, actually, we had adjudication against the Hard Rock Cafe in London that ran a competition and didn't include any T's and C's whatsoever. In fact, this happened to Petplan as well. They didn't include any T's and C's in a competition that they were running over Twitter. You have to have T's and C's for a competition, because if you think about it, entering into a competition is a little bit like entering into a contract. That will tell you when you can close it, what the opening and closing dates are, and what the ASA will expect of you is to make clear all the relevant conditions of entry into a competition before people enter. If you don't make that kind of information available, then the chances are you're going to be on the wrong side of the ASA, they'll adjudicate against you. So the lesson out of this is, do have T's and C's. The fact that you're dealing with competitions over Twitter does not absolve you of the responsibility to have them, and the best way to deal with it is probably a bit.ly link out to a homepage somewhere that has the T's and C's on. Then you've got to make sure that you draw the winners, you've got to make sure that you're not overwhelmed by demand, you've got to respond to requests if people make them of you. Saying, I can't tell you who the winner is because of data protection law actually isn't going to work, because in one of the adjudications I've just mentioned, the ASA said that the Data Protection Act is not incompatible with advertising codes. So run them very carefully, do have T's and C's, do make them easy to find, most importantly, and you probably won't go too far wrong. So moving on from that cheery image of the bird, if I can. Right, not only do you need to worry about all this, bear in mind there are T's and C's of every single social media platform you will sign up to. There's all sorts of other laws that govern marketing generally in social media comms. The Ofcom Broadcasting Code, AppVod is now actually going to become part of Ofcom. But the point of this is that there are different T's and C's for each and every platform. Facebook, for example, are quite touchy about brands and corporate content, and normally if brands engage with them and have a genuine complaint, then Facebook will shut content down, remove pages, change feeds, and so on and so forth. Twitter, however, does allow for parody accounts. So if you think about reputation management, as long as it's clear that the account in question is a parody account, then Twitter will probably still leave it up. And they tend to be quite robust when they get requests to take content down because it's defamatory, that kind of thing. So it's important to remember that if you're working across a number of different platforms, it's worth getting very familiar with the T's and C's of each one to understand exactly how far you can push your content on them. Because, of course, what you don't want to do is spend all this time developing great content only to find that it breaches a set of T's and C's that you weren't aware of, and then it all has to be pulled. You've wasted that insight, you've wasted that marketing effort. So get familiar with the T's and C's, because more often than not, if you have a problem with something on social media, going to the T's and C's and running through their abuse and complaints processes is going to be the quickest way to get your result, rather than going to lawyers and rather than threatening to sue somebody, even though I would always say threaten to sue somebody because it's a great idea. Anyway, I would say that. But seriously, do get familiar with T's and C's. T's and C's are the contract that you enter into to use a social media platform. And thinking about contracts that you enter into, we talked before about who do you trust to tweet. Well, there are lots and lots of cases where employment law has been asked to intervene when employees go off the reservation on social media, and unfortunately they do fairly often. The answer to all of this is to have a social media policy. You should have any number of different policies as part of a business. You'll have an IT use policy, you'll have a discrimination policy, probably a data protection policy. The reason you have one is that a data protection policy can be amended, reviewed, and so on and so forth. It doesn't form part of a contract of employment, and you can change it if you need to, if technology changes, if the business changes. But what you set out in there are the standards that you expect from people when they engage with people online, when there's any kind of clear link to, when there's any kind of clear work-related context. And you can say, quite legally, that the social media policy will cover how people spend their time outside the office online, as well as when they spend their time inside the office, as well as when they use their own devices. If people are using their own devices on your network, then you should also think about having a bring your own device policy as well. But to give you some examples of where the court, where the employment tribunal has found issues with what people do on social media, the most recent case we had on this, many of these cases have fought around the issue of whether or not what somebody has done justifies suspension or dismissal, and that becomes a question of whether or not the person has committed an act of gross misconduct, and you can spell that out in your social media policy to avoid having these disputes after the fact. But recently there was a case involving Twitter, a guy called Laws who worked for Game. Game, terrifyingly, until fairly recently I think, had all of their different stores having their own Twitter account, not managed centrally. Now of course if they use crowd control, sorry, I'll stop that blatant plug. But every single, thank you, you're welcome. Every single game store had its own Twitter account. The case in this case was against a guy called Laws, who was a loss adjuster. It was suggested by a number of different people that the followers of these various game sites should follow Mr. Laws as well. And unfortunately, Mr. Laws had a bit of a mouth on him and went on to send a series of tweets over 18 months that offended the following people, and this is quite a long list: A&E nurses, the disabled, Newcastle United fans, pregnant women, the sick, the elderly. He got in trouble for that. He said, well, I didn't give people permission to read my tweets. He doesn't understand how Twitter works particularly well. His profile wasn't private. This was in the public domain, and so this did lead to his dismissal being justified. And there's lots and lots of cases like that. But to avoid having to have this argument, have a social media policy and train on it, because there are cases that show that having a social media policy, embedding it into everything that your employees do, will enable you to discipline them, will enable you to dismiss them if you need to. There was a case called Crisp and Apple Retail, where Mr. Crisp was talking about Mobile Me being down. The social media policy was drilled into Apple's members of staff from the moment they walked through their office, and so that was fair enough. Apple takes its brand extremely seriously. So think about planning, but when you are having a social media policy meeting, when you think about how to implement it, don't just say what people can't do, say what they can do. Give them an insight into what's best practice on social media. If social media policy works well, then you take it out to your staff and you train on it, they read it, they understand it. Bear in mind, of course, though, that when you're using social media as part of the recruitment process, if you are looking and vetting people through their online presence, that will involve the processing of personal data. So train your recruitment teams to understand that that could potentially land you in trouble. And if you do want to vet people's online profiles, it's a good idea to ask them to send a link to that profile to you and say, are you happy for us to look at your online profile in connection with your application for employment, that kind of thing. So having talked about employees, again, we've talked a little bit about the various issues you need to be aware of there. Confidential information, harassment over social media between employees. It does happen every now and again. Employment law and social media works just the same way as it would do offline, but having a policy in place and training on it and then using it and enforcing it is going to be of a huge amount of use to you. So let's see if we can get a bit of feedback here, assuming you're all still awake. I've not looked at questions yet. Who has any feedback from anybody who has ever copied and pasted an image from Google or taken it from Facebook and stuck it into marketing communication or dealt with it or used it in some other way and thought that was all fine to do?
Be interesting to see if anyone owns up to that, Steve.
Anyone? Aha!
Matt,
I can see some questions in the past.
No
smiley, no winking smiley. Before Creative Commons, guilty. This is great. Okay, so Creative Commons is a great point, but the reason I'm making this point is that a lot of people will say, well, if it's on the internet, it's fair game, isn't it? You know, we can copy and paste to our heart's content. I hate to tell you this, wrong. And if you're dealing with photographs, photographers are particularly militant about their copyright. And I'm going to get to crediting the source in a moment. I can see that question in the panel. Creating the source is one thing. Bear in mind that if you create a work of creativity, that can be an image, that can be a sound recording, that can be a video, that can be a film, that can be some written material, whatever else. That's all a work of creativity. And normally the only person who can decide how that work of creativity is exploited is the original owner of the copyright, and that normally is the person who creates it, unless it's an employee creating something in the course of their employment, in which case that work normally belongs to the employer. Having said that, there are limited circumstances where you don't have to ask permission. If I'm the BBC and I show some footage, for example, from a Premier League football game, you will see somewhere in the bottom right-hand part of the corner of the screen or the left-hand part of the screen, copyright B-Sky-B 2016. That's what's called the sufficient acknowledgement. And what they're doing there is taking a section of the broadcast and, as if I can just get your name there, as Kate is saying, they're crediting the source. Now, that's fine for people who are using it for the purposes of using material for what's called fair dealing purposes. That doesn't mean that you can screen a whole film and say, I'm using it for fair dealing purposes. You can only use parts of original copyright works without asking permission if you don't take too much, to the extent that it doesn't compete with the economic interests of the owner of the copyright, doesn't take money out of their pocket. And more importantly, if you're doing so for the purposes of news reporting, criticism, or review, or education. Criticism and review is quite narrow. News reporting, you can use video clips. You can't use photographs for the purposes of news reporting. You can only fair deal in photographs when using them for the purpose of criticism or review. But that's quite a narrow exception. And it's always better to ask permission first than forgiveness. If you're using images for the purposes of marketing, the chances are you won't be using it for criticism or review or news reporting, and it is better to either ask permission to use the content, again, say you'll credit someone, that's all fine, or buy the content in. Normally people will want their content to spread as far as possible, but the risk is that if you don't get permission, what will happen is that people can threaten an injunction. Normally damages in copyright cases don't tend to be that high, but costs can be extremely high. And what people will do will be to go to the platforms and go to the hosts and say, take that down because it infringes my rights. They will take it down first and ask questions later because of something called the e-commerce directive. What that means is that if you're made aware, and you weren't aware of it before, of infringing, defamatory, of any kind of unlawful content being on your system or your platform, and you then take it down expeditiously, normally within a day, then you won't be sued, you won't be prosecuted for it. So ask permission rather than forgiveness. It's not, there was a case for a long time that suggested that sharing links online was a copyright infringement. It isn't. Thankfully, the PRCA stepped into the breach on that one and stepped up for the industry. Yes, you can use Creative Commons licenses. Be very, very careful about the terms of the license though, and if you Google search something, always check the license on the site that it's on to know how you can deal with that particular content. It's a case-by-case basis, but don't assume that just because someone says it's a free image that it is necessarily free. Having thought about that, brands on social media. So bear in mind that if someone registers a domain name that relates to your brand, then you can have a go at them for what's something that's called cyber squatting and hopefully get the domain name passed back to you. If someone is looking to exploit your goodwill online, then that could be passing off. If they're using your brand in the course of trade, there isn't the direct comparison because that is allowed under trademark legislation. Comparative advertising is legal. The case on that actually involved Three talking about their mobile phone tariff. Of course, if people are deliberately misusing your brand to generate money, then that's the kind of thing you can threaten them with a case over. If you have a registered trademark and somebody registers a domain name, then that could also potentially be an infringement. So this is all around cyber squatting. What I would say about this is that you do need to be thinking about what you put in sponsored links, because there are cases that suggest that in paid search terms, if you bid on somebody else's trademark as a keyword on Google and that delivers a sponsored link in ad text that suggests that there's a connection between your business and theirs, that can potentially be a trademark infringement. And there was a case against Amazon brought by Lush, where Lush don't actually sell their stuff on Amazon. However, people were typing in Lush and Amazon and being fed to a competitor. That is a trademark infringement, which is all fine as long as you're dealing with someone who is deliberately misusing your brand. However, what do you do when someone just hates your brand? This guy is Michael O'Leary. One for the questions out there, does anybody work for Ryanair? No.
No.
Has anybody ever flown with Ryanair? Probably. Has anybody ever enjoyed flying with Ryanair? Oh, is that yes, you work with, or I'm not going to get, I shouldn't have asked this
We
question.
have a few airports on the line, so yes, they will have worked
right.
with Ryanair.
Okay, so Ryanair, not enjoyed. Ryanair, you get what you pay for. It's not everybody's cup of tea, but it is cheap and it is a service. However, Ryanair had a problem for a long time with a blog called ihateryanair.co.uk on the domain name ihateryanair.co.uk. Ryanair said that's a misuse of our brand. How dare he? He's taking money out of our pocket. He's using our name without permission. We want it back. There was very little that they could do about that for a long time, because what this guy was doing wasn't actually making money off Ryanair's brand. He just hated Ryanair, and he updated the blog very regularly back when Google was all based on the freshness of content rather than the quality of content, inbound links and so on and so forth. And Ryanair really, really, really hated him, ironically, or not so ironically. And there was nothing they could do until he sold £300 worth of advertising space. That enabled Ryanair to say, aha, now you're using our brand to generate income, then we can take the website off you. And they did take the domain name off him. And that ultimately led to the guy behind the site setting up a site not long after that called ihateryanair.gov.uk. So when you're looking at people misusing your brand, they need to be genuinely misusing it. It can't be someone who just hates you. If it is someone who just hates you and your brand, then there's a question about how you engage with them, how you go after them, what you do about that. And then you're into issues around defamation more than anything else. Now, defamation is all about content which could affect someone's reputation, and that's an individual or a business. When the court looks at defamation cases, they look at whether or not the statement carried what's called a defamatory meaning. So whether or not the statement could affect your reputation in the eyes of reasonable members of the public, right-thinking members of society. There are defences to defamation claims, such as it's not liable if it's substantially true, if the gist of what you're saying is true, if it's honest comments, if it's in public interest, that kind of thing. There are also certain defences if you're online. If someone makes you aware of defamatory content, then you are normally protected if you take it down quickly, and there's something now called the Section 5 procedure to do with anonymous comments made online. All of that has come out of something called the Defamation Act 2013, which now says that not only does a statement need to be defamatory, i.e. could affect your reputation for you to be able to sue on it, it now also needs to cause something that's called serious harm. Now, serious harm to an individual is a bit of a movable feast, and the cases say that some statements will be so serious to obviously cause someone serious harm. So if you suggest that someone, for example, is a criminal, paedophile, that kind of thing. However, if you make an apology very quickly and very publicly, the chances are much of the damage to their reputation will be repaired. The way it used to work is that you used to presume that harm had been caused to somebody's reputation as part of a defamatory statement. Now you need to prove it. And if you're a business, you normally need to prove that you've suffered some kind of financial loss, or are at least likely to suffer serious financial loss. Now, that's led to a lot of scratching your heads around the legal community about what serious harm actually means. We've had a number of cases. There's one called Cook and Miraboo News that said that if you're dealing with individuals, again, some things will be so obviously defamatory to cause serious harm. If you're a business, we've had cases that say that actually you don't necessarily need to get a forensic accountant in. You can draw evidence of serious harm from an inference from what's happened to the business as a result of this bit of the statement being made. The cases show that one law firm in particular was suggested that they were corrupt. They could point to the fact that they lost at least one customer, one piece of business as a result of the allegation that had been brought up against them by an opponent. That's the kind of thing the courts will not be happy about. The most recent case saw somebody leaving his employment, and his ex-employer sent an email to about 102 people saying that he was dishonest, he'd been dismissed for gross misconduct. They were looking at referring him to the police. Even though that didn't get much come back to him, what the court said is, because of the nature of the statement and who received it, and even though people were silent to the extent of its communication, that would be defamatory. That would be something that he could sue on, and he actually won in that particular case. Now, you would then think about, well, actually, how can you divine what people mean from what they say? I say that actually Twitter, brevity forces people to be concise and actually helps when you're looking at meaning. And you only need to think back to the case of Sally Bercow. Sally Bercow, around the time that Lord McAlpine was accused of being involved in a child sex abuse scandal, tweeted when a lot of people were putting two and two together and getting six to say, I wonder why Lord McAlpine is trending, star, innocent face, star. Now, people were suggesting that if it was a Tory politician at a certain time in the 70s, then it had to be Lord McAlpine who was involved in the scandal. ITV suggested as much, but didn't name him, so did the BBC, and Lord McAlpine sued them on the basis that, even though he wasn't named, anyone who had knowledge of the background facts could put two and two together, would know that what the allegation that was being made was that Lord McAlpine was a paedophile. Now, Sally Bercow had 50-odd thousand Twitter followers and said in her defence, I was only asking a question, and if not, I was only making a joke. Well, the way the law treats that is that if you repeat an allegation, you treat it as if you've made it yourself, and if the innuendo meaning, people who know what's going on in the background, is clear, then that can be just as damaging. And what the court said in this particular case was that it was clear from her tweet that what she was saying was Lord McAlpine was a paedophile, and even if that wasn't obvious, anyone who knew what was going on in the background, understood how Twitter worked, had an interest in politics, would know that she was saying Lord McAlpine was a paedophile. More importantly, saying star, innocent face, star was not a disclaimer and did not get her off the hook. Now, we didn't find out how much she'd have to pay in damages, because sadly Lord McAlpine passed away before we got to that point. However, she lost on liability, and until fairly recently, she was selling furniture to pay her legal costs. So humour on social media can be a dangerous thing, but the court does take it seriously. Damages and defamation claims, certainly around social media, aren't always massive. However, the costs can be. We had a recent case involving defamation on an online bulletin board to do with Blackpool Football Club. £20,000 in damages split across two defendants, even when one of them had been convicted of a previous offence, a criminal offence. That all goes to the point of reputation and whether someone's reputation was damaged. So the court does take this kind of thing seriously. Much as the serious harm test now means that it's actually tougher to get a libel case off the ground, we're seeing a rise in libel cases every year based on social media. Tying into that and tying into data protection is the issue of the right to be forgotten. You may have heard about this coming out of a case called Google Spain, where a Spanish national had an issue with the fact that links are available on Google that referred to an unpaid debt that had been paid off fairly a long time ago. That haunted him, it followed him around the web, he wanted to get rid of it, and what the European Court of Justice did was to say that Google is a data controller for the purpose of data protection law. Bear in mind under data protection law that obligations all fall on data controllers, not data processors, the people who hold that data, the people who decide how it's used in the first place. In this particular case, they said that a search engine is a data controller, and as part of the obligations of a data controller, you've got to make sure that personal data you hold is relevant, up to date, accurate, not excessive. The fact that this was still available was in breach of data protection principles, and as a result, you can now ask Google to remove items from search engine listings that are irrelevant, there's no real public interest in it, that are incorrect, that are just outdated, Lots and lots of people are doing it, hundreds of thousands of people every day. There has been some guidance that's come out of something called the Article 29 Working Party to suggest that if you're in the public eye or expose yourself to the public eye, then it's not going to be easy to wipe yourself off the face of the internet. But a lot of people are using this now, and if you are dealing with reputation management, if it's a particularly personal attack, data protection, the right to be forgotten might be a way of dealing with attacks against your individual company directors. Again, it's all very much to play for, but it might be a reason why search engine results disappear without you realizing, or it will at least explain why some of them disappear. Really cheerfully, some people are going to jail for what they do on social media. One of which that came very close was that, well, actually didn't. He was fined. Was a guy called Paul Chambers, who in the top left-hand corner you'll see tweeted a while ago as part of something called the Twitter joke trial. Crap, Robinhood Airport's closed. You've got a week and a bit to get your shit together. Otherwise, I'm blowing the airport sky high. Now, he thought that was funny right up until the point that Special Branch came to his house and took all his computer equipment. He was arrested for making a bomb threat. Now, if you make a bomb threat under the Criminal Justice Act, I think it's 1979, you need to have intent to carry out that threat, as well as having made the threat in the first place. You need to have a state of mind to carry it out. Paul Chambers is actually charged under the offence under the Communications Act 2003, Section 127, which says that it's an offence to use a public electronic communications network to send a message of indecent, obscene, or menacing character. That could apply to an awful lot of content on the web. People are getting arrested for that every single day, and if you think about it, that's actually quite a draconian law, originally put in place to deal with nuisance phone calls. Not only do you have that, you have harassment law, again, applies on the web, same as it would do anywhere else. If you engage in a course of conduct which causes someone fear, alarm, or distress. Malicious communications, as was the case with Tom Daley, where you use a public electronic communications network to send a message to cause someone needless anxiety, or where you know that it's false. The most serious cases involved Caroline Caudo Perez and Stella Creasy, who were able to get Jane Austen on the back of a £10 note, got threatened with death and rape for their trouble. The worst offenders in that particular case went to prison for, I think it was 9 and 12 weeks respectively. So there are CPS guidelines that suggest that the police simply don't have the time to deal with all this, and it's quite right, and there is a question of degree. If it's obviously not a threat against life and limb, it's normally the case that it's not going to be in the public interest to prosecute someone for what they say or do on social media. However, if there is a specific threat to life and limb, if they haven't shown any remorse, if they know what they're doing, if it's part of a sustained campaign, then you could end up getting prosecuted for it. And more people are getting prosecuted on social media or for what they do on social media every single day. Now,
Steve, can I just pause you just for 1 second, just to say I'm conscious that we are running slightly over time, but I can also see that everybody is still with us and staying on the line. So I'm keen to keep going and to make sure that we get to your questions at the end. So I'm just keen to keep going. So apologies if any of you do have to dash off in the next couple of minutes, but we will make sure that everybody gets a copy. So yes. Thanks, Steve. Sorry.
No, there's two slides left, guys. I promise I'm nearly there. So what we talked about before with the e-commerce immunity. And the e-commerce immunity is if someone has a problem with something that's on your platform and you take it down once you're made aware of that, then the chances are you can't be sued for it and you can't be prosecuted for it, because the government doesn't want, and certainly the EU doesn't want, platforms for getting in trouble for what their users say. So that's why people tend to take down first and ask questions later. And that's always a good thing to do if you're facing that kind of complaint. Now, things go wrong. It is how you manage a fail that ultimately decides how it goes down in the eyes of history. And if I can click on to the next slide. Right. There are a number of case studies where social can go wrong and what happened as a result. So Nestle had an issue when Greenpeace hacked their Facebook page to change the Kit Kat logo to Killer, when it turned out that palm oil was used in the manufacture of Kit Kats. Palm oil is a deforestant, leads to the destruction of the rainforest. Nestle's Facebook page was run by two fellow junior members of staff, threatened to get the lawyers in, threatened to sue Greenpeace. It turned into a much bigger problem and put a much brighter light on their policy and led to the CEO having to make a public apology. A few years ago, and this is my chance to sneak Batman into any presentation I ever do, somebody thought it'd be a good idea to walk into a screening of The Dark Knight Rises with a machine gun and gun down the whole front row. A very tragic event. A Twitter feed called Celeb Boutique, that was a fast fashion retailer, got online and said, Aurora, as in Aurora, Colorado, is trending, must be our Aurora dresses worn by Kim Kardashian. You can imagine what happened next. It did not go well. If anybody's a fan of Gary Barlow, I'm not, because I have taste, sorry. I'm not, because I'm bitter, because I had to send my wife to a Take That concert recently, and it cost me an inordinate amount of money. Gary Barlow, by all accounts, is quite a nice guy. He does a lot of good work for charity. He had a solo album out fairly recently and took part in a Twitter chat called Ask Gary, much like Michael O'Leary did, you'll see there. I don't think I've got a problem with Michael O'Leary, but there you go. Who, when he took part in a Twitter chat called #AskMOL, spent a lot of time talking about the cleavage of the profile pictures of the women that were talking to him that day. He needed training. Gary Barlow went online that particular night and said, right, ask me anything. So it started quite nicely. Gary, how many cars do you own? Gary, who plays piano on a new record, so on and so forth. But of course, this is around the time when Gary Barlow's legal, although some people may argue not necessarily moral, approach to his tax mitigation strategy became a matter of public record. So Gary was involved in a number of businesses that absorbed losses, and again, I stress that that is legal. A lot of people had a problem with that. They asked him questions like, Gary, where do you hidden all the money? Gary, how much tax did you dodge? Gary, how can you support children in the Tory government? So on and so forth. Gary, which PR agency thought this would be a good idea? Gary, have you fired them? Not long after that, it went surreal. Gary, is Jason really orange? Still, what I thought was the absolute best question in that entire session. My own question, Gary, have you ever built a picket fence out of Cadbury's fingers? Nothing. Gary Barlow only came back on Twitter at Christmas last year to promote Take That's new album, which they're touring in support of, to pay back the £2 million they owe the taxman. So that goes to show you, again, the wisdom of the crowd. You can start out with great intentions, and unfortunately, sometimes the crowd will undo them, and you just can't see this kind of thing coming. But in summary, the opportunity of all this far outweighs the risks. All I'm asking is that at least if you're aware of the risks, you can manage them, you can plan for them, and like I say, doing it with a plan, with the right kind of policies in place, with the right kind of thinking in place, planning in peacetime for when something does go wrong, you can mitigate a lot of these risks. These risks are the same as they would be with any other part of your business. However, on social media, they go wrong more easily and the fallout spreads more quickly. So that is a lot of information to take in. I've talked very fast. I will need to lie down after this. If everybody's still here, Steve, we have some time for questions.
Fantastic. So thank you very much for all the questions that have been coming through. Apologies if I haven't got through all of your questions. There are lots that I'm grouping together under certain themes. So again, if we don't get to your question, those of you who got them in early, I stand a better chance of being in the question mix, but we will definitely take some of them offline that are specific. So Steve, just on the general themes, this is a really interesting question from Mark. So Mark has asked, in terms of the fines, how will EU law in data protection affect the public sector? So you've mentioned about being fined. How would a public sector body be fined 4% of their turnover?
Well, that's a fair question. They'll just be fined an eye-watering amounts of money. I think is the answer to that. A lot of recent monetary penalties have been based around are actually leaks in the public sector, where somebody's left an unencrypted pen drive, for example, and a load of user data has got out. We've seen a lot of high-profile hacks and data breaches in the private sector. So the TalkTalk hack fairly recently, Morrison's, things like that. It's a fair question. The focus at the minute of everything I've seen is much more on how much they're going to go after the private sector. But that's a fair point. I think they're certainly not going to escape censure, and there will be some big fines levied against them, because the ultimately it's public sector bodies that you would expect to be more responsible about how they deal with public data, that don't necessarily just build databases for marketing purposes. So I wouldn't expect that they're going to escape, some very serious attention if something goes wrong. But if you bear me one moment, I can Google this while
live.
I can Google this live while we're doing this. So they're talking about various exemptions. GDPR public sector fines. Let's have a look at this. It's something I need to think about a little bit more. But again, the headline has been around the private sector fines.
Right. Okay.
And again, I think the tying it to turnover, mainly because they want to scare people. They want it to be, rather than just a small amount of money, it's something that goes on a sliding scale with how much money you make through a business. So that's a fair question.
And it sounds like
when you've stumped me. I need to think about that.
Okay, good question, Mark. You've flummoxed Steve on the first question. Great. So we'll move on. The next is we've had a number of different versions of questions around brand protection, and so thanks to Rebecca and Tram and those of you who've sent those in. So I think the feeling seems to be, and some of them aren't even questions, they're more statements, that people are very concerned about how far they can protect their brand. Firstly, without breaching data protection. So I guess where you know the public profile of the people that are taking you on. But secondly, also those that are perhaps anonymous and have fictitious profiles and are undermining you in a little bit more of a covert way. So I don't know whether...
well, yeah, there are steps you can take. I mean, you need to... a lot of times this can end up as a bit of an own goal. So McDonald's very, very famously went after some people who were leafleting them, and they ended up with the biggest negative halo effect for the fact they took them on. And more importantly, they took them on and couldn't recover much of the legal costs because these people just couldn't pay, the eye-watering cost that McDonald's ran up on this particular case. If you're dealing with anonymous comments on websites, if it's defamatory, we have something called the Section 5 procedure, where if you see an anonymous comment on a website, you write to the website's proprietor and say, this is defamatory, take it down. And what they will then do is go back to the person who posted those details and ask if they can disclose their name and address and then be given to you. And then the idea is that you will pursue them directly. Now, if the person concerned doesn't want their details to be handed over, or if they don't have the right kind of details, then they have to take the statement in question down. So that, more often than not, I've seen it fairly recently where actually trolls, for want of a better turn of phrase, don't want to be outed, don't want to have the fight publicly, and don't want their details passing over because they don't want to be sued. So if you run through that process, again, that gives you at least some redress. Going beyond that, you can apply for something that's called a motley fool order. A motley fool order is where you can go to either an ISP or the operator of a website and say, please hand over the correct personal data of the person who's responsible for this comment. Normally you'll be able to get that information provided that it's actually relevant to a proper claim. Normally people will say, the platforms will say, we don't want to hand that over, you need a court order to get that information. You can get that order, but this is more, I think, a question of actually reputation management than brand protection. Reputation management is tough to do in the online world, certainly the way things are now, but it's not impossible. Data protection in particular is an option when you're looking at nasty things said about individuals or the use of individual data. If you're thinking about how you sort of manage your brand online and social media, I would say certainly register profiles, get domain names, get variant domain names, even think about registering domain names that might be used for hate sites. So, I don't know, Burn the Sucks, for example, that kind of thing. Lots and lots of people are registering those variants now to stop people getting them. We've had one fairly recently against a client that was nameofclientcourtcase.com. We eventually got that handed over. If they're using your brand in a way, if they have no legitimate interest in your brand, if they've got no reason for using it, then the chances are that I can, or Nominate or a domain name register may hand them back over. But what they also say is that if someone really does just hate you, that can be a legitimate interest in and of itself. If it is someone that is just looking to profit on the back of your goodwill, then there are all sorts of actions you can take. Certainly if they're looking to sell that domain name back to you at a profit. But yeah, it can be difficult. But I think, planning, knowing where you're going to go, knowing what you're going to be doing with the brand, and registering defensively, so that's trademarks, domain names, social media profiles, that is some of the best steps you can take. And like I say, having a plan, knowing what happens when you come across someone who really does hate you. If you know who the person is that's posting, even though it appears anonymous, then you can't necessarily rely on the Section 5 defense. You've got to not know who they are. So there are options. They're not always easy, and sometimes you do need to think very carefully about who you go after, in that can affect your brand legacy as well. If you seem to be stamping out legitimate debate, that can obviously cause a bigger problem than it solves.
Okay, that's some great advice in there. Steve, so the next one is probably a step in policy, or a foot in policy and a foot in photos. And there've been a number of questions around photos. And
Yeah.
two parts of the issues around photos. The first being employees. So merging a couple of the questions into one. So if an employee is working in a very public facing environment and possibly uniformed, and you know, you've mentioned the importance of having a policy in place. What if that staff member wants to opt out of appearing in any of the organisation's social media?
Well,
You know, is that an option for them? And B, does the employer have a right to protect them if, say, a member of the public is taking photographs of them, I don't know, say at the site of a crash scene? So that's an interesting one.
No, it's a very interesting one. If you remember the public, just going back to that previous question, somebody asked if you can get an injunction. Yes, you can get an injunction. I think that was Lewis that was asking that question. If it's not anonymous, yes, you can injunct people over defamatory content. But just coming back to this, mostly employment contracts should have in them, especially where they're businesses that do a lot of social media engagement, a clause to say that you give us your permission to process your personal data in the course of your employment, and your personal data can constitute your appearance in a photograph. If you are particularly socially active, then you might want to say to employees, do you have a problem with it? And if they say, we don't want you to do that, they have a right to object to their processing of their data for marketing purposes, which this probably would be, then the chances are they will opt out, and you should think about how you work around that. If it's a member of the public taking a photograph of a crash scene, then it's a little bit different, because if it's a journalist, that the processing of that data may be covered by the journalism exemption, potentially, and if you're an individual, there's an exemption for processing for your own individual purposes as well. That can change a little bit if you're using it for the purposes of an individual's business, but it's quite a complex thing. I would be, if you're piloting this and if you're doing some social media engagement, I'd go to the employee's concern, think about who you're going to involve, and if you're doing a shoot, for example, carry some release forms with you as well, because you can, if you just make people aware of the fact that you're taking photos, say to them, if you don't want to be in a photo, then don't come in line of the camera, so that people can opt out if they want to. And if you do focus on a particular individual, whether that's staff or a member of the public, have a release form, get them to sign it, and then you've got their permission to be able to use their image in the campaign going forward. So a release form is very much your friend. But that's not only about using the name and likeness in conjunction with your brand, it's also using their personal data as part of the photograph.
Okay, and then another scenario where if a staff member takes the photo or is asked to take asked to take a photo on their personal phone that then is contributed towards a campaign, does that employee have to be credited for that photo because they've taken it on their personal mobile phone?
Well, to do this apple pie fashion, you'd have them taking those photos on a work phone, and you'd only have them taking those photos during working hours, so that the copyright in that would be yours. Again, you can get a release form if you need to, if you're going to use their images. But I'd also, you can deal with a lot of that through your bring your own device policy as well. Things can get quite twitchy around that, and employees can get quite twitchy if all of a sudden you start crowdsourcing your campaigns using their imagery. So again, I'd pick a key group of advocates that you want to do that, train them, and have the right terms in place so that you can use the images that they capture as part of an ongoing campaign.
Mm-hmm. I think it's really interesting just how many questions we've had around the issue of employment, and clearly that's an area that you support and help a lot of businesses with, because traditionally we were possibly more focused on the public facing elements, and actually there's an awful lot going on now behind closed doors in terms of agreements and what people do and don't do as an employee within their social media. So I guess that all links nicely to the...
That's quite right. Sorry, I was cutting in without realising I was cutting in there. That's quite right. I mean, you just need to look at things like, there's a restaurant in Manchester called 47 King Street, and a member of staff replied to a bad review saying that you're all chavs, you wouldn't know fine dining if it hit you in the face, or something along those lines. That went viral. Now, in that particular case, a member of staff wasn't dismissed, but there are cases where members of staff do particularly stupid things and they get dismissed. So there's a case involving Summerfield, 2 members of staff hitting each other over the head with an empty plastic bag, viewed 7 times, 3 of which was by the manager. They were dismissed. The court looked at that and said, the tribunal looked at that and said, no, that's over the top, you shouldn't have dismissed them. So a lot of it is about degree, about whether you're acting reasonably, and about just saying to members of staff that, if you bring the business into disrepute, this could lead to you being disciplined.
Yes, yeah, okay. Right, last couple of questions then. So I think this is probably a quick one for Jamie around competitions. So you've obviously had a good response in terms of the advice that you've given on competitions. But Jamie asked this, are there some standard terms and conditions, or is this something that needs to be personalised when somebody runs a competition? Do they have to reinvent the terms and conditions each time?
No, I don't think you do. It can be a set of standard terms and conditions. What you need to cover off in things like how the entry can be made, who's excluded, so employees are excluded, if you have any geographical restrictions, what the price is. It will be a standard set that you can use again and again and again that will need tweaking every time, but you don't need to go back to a blank piece of paper every time. So as long as you cover the basics, then the chances are you won't need to go back to the lawyer every single time. And normally, in my experience, that tends to be the marketing team working with legal. And as long as you link out to, they can be on your website somewhere, as long as you link out to them from the content that you're referring to them in, then that is bringing them to the attention of members of the public. And then, the T's and C's will cover most of the issues that you encounter when you're running competitions.
Okay, fantastic. Now, last question, and I guess it's a bit more advice in terms of the issue of social media policy. How often do people need to review their social media policy in view of the fact that lots of things you've covered today have evolved very recently? So what's your advice in terms of social media policy and getting that bit right?
Well, in terms of what I've just clicked onto my contact details bit almost subliminally there.
Yeah, go back.
Moving on from that. No, I mean, in terms of review, at the very least a year, but the environment moves. A lot of the principles will stay the same. What you do in and out of the office can get you in trouble, can get you disciplined. This is what will happen if you do embarrass on social media. This is what you should do. This is what you shouldn't do. This is what we expect of you. I'd say every 6 months, because the technology moves so quickly. It should be something that you look at again, not every week, but it should be something that you do keep under constant review, because the way that you will have younger members of staff coming through the system to whom social media will be more important than older members of staff. So there's that constant churn. I think before long, the vast majority of employees will be using social without businesses being aware of it anyway, and it just I think it behooves you to take a breath every 6 months, look at how you've had to implement it, look at how you've had to enforce it, look at what's going on in the market, look at any big cases that come out, and think about it from there. I mean, if you can monitor social media, you can monitor email, internet use, but you need to tell people that you're doing so to be on the right side of data protection law. And all of a sudden you might think, well, we need to start monitoring people who didn't previously. You would then need to roll that out. People would need to acknowledge that. That might be a big change that you need to plan for. So it is worth thinking about, I'd say, at least twice a year. Okay.
Brilliant. Well, Steve, thank you very much. We've had a lot of your time and it's all been really good stuff. So a really, really big thank you. Just to reiterate, Steve's contact detail, he's kindly provided all of his contact details in the presentation, and each and every one of you will receive a copy of the recording of the presentation so that you can revisit any sections that perhaps or even share with colleagues. So hope you've enjoyed the webinar today. It's been brought to you by CrowdControlHQ, UK's leading social media risk management and compliance platform. And please do get in touch if you need support or help with any of your social media management issues. And so a big thanks from me, a big thanks to Steve, and please do keep your feedback and any final questions that you've got coming through. And as Steve mentioned, keep in touch and follow us on Twitter, and please keep engaging. So best of luck with your social media, and a big thanks for joining us today.
Thanks very much, guys. Pleasure to speak to you all. Thanks again, Michelle. And I say, managing this is the best thing you can do. Crowd Control are great on it.
Thanks, Steve. We'll speak soon.
Thanks, guys. Take care.